What's up, everybody? My name is Christian Harvey, founder of Amplify Black Voices. I am here with the Andrew Young Center for Global Leadership on the More Conversations podcast. Today, we have Mr. Black. How are you doing today?
Great. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Today, I was wondering, could you elaborate on your personal background and history, particularly in your journey from Miami, Florida to Morehouse College, and how did that influence the movement and vision within the Atlanta student movement?
All right, I was born in Miami, in Liberty City, which today might be called a ghetto. It's all black community. But one good thing about it was that everybody of every station lived there. So your doctors and lawyers and teachers and everybody encountered each other on a day-to-day basis. So you had role models around all the time. Miami was as segregated perhaps as Atlanta, but the segregation was a little bit more pristine perhaps than up here, in that a lot of the white people who lived in Miami were originally snowbirds who had second homes there in the wintertime, ended up living there later. And also it was a more cosmopolitan area, a lot of folk from the Caribbean and from a lot of Jews, large Jewish community there, and northeastern white people. So we had more polite racism there.
Many members of the Atlanta student movement, from my understanding, were also part of the NAACP Youth Council. How did that connection intertwine with the inherent spirit and goals of the Atlanta student movement?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because the only other surviving member of the one class that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught, of which I was a member, is Dr. Amos Brown, who is the vice president of the United States pastor in San Francisco. And he was very active in the NAACP from his youth on. And when he got to Morehouse, he continued to be very active with the NAACP. So he came with that kind of commitment to civil rights and was one of the early persons in support of our movement and involved in our movement.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. I might mention that growing up in Miami, I could not attend any college in Miami because of racism. University of Miami was there, but I could not attend there. So I had to leave Miami to go to college. And I came to Morehouse partly because I was recruited. I was offered an early admission scholarship from 11th grade, which I declined because I'd been elected student body president for the next year. But the important part of that story is there was a young man who was offered an early admission scholarship from 10th grade who accepted his. So when I got to Morehouse, he was a year ahead of me instead of a year behind me. And I mention him because he is Dr. Donald Hopkins, who's largely credited with the elimination of the guinea worm and smallpox in the world. And President Jimmy Carter refers to him as his hero. Part of that story is that there was a brain drain of black talent from places like Miami because black folk couldn't go to college there. So they left and many of us never went back.
Can you share with us the pivotal moment of Dr. King's arrest in 1960 and how that ignited the Atlanta student movement? How did that galvanize the movement and shape its trajectory?
When Dr. King was arrested on October 19 in 1960, it's important to have some background to that story. Two important factors. One, that he had agreed with the established black community, and including his father, that he would not get involved in the Atlanta civil rights activism. Their attitude was that essentially, we got this. Okay, you do that Alabama stuff and Albany, Georgia, that's fine, but, we got this. And he'd agreed to that. All right, the other part of the story is that he had been arrested earlier in DeKalb County while driving an automobile with a Georgia license plate on it. And somebody said a tail light out or whatever. And he still had his Alabama driver's license. The real reason that he was stopped was because he had a white female in the front seat with him. His wife was in the back seat. And that was Lillian Smith, the renowned author of Strange Fruit. That's actually why he was stopped. So he was arrested. I went to the trial. The Judge Mitchell, sat sideways on the bench with a comic book, flipping through it. The whole time that the defense, Attorney Donald Hollowell, presented his case. And then the judge said, "Are you finished?" 4 months. He sentenced King to 4 months in Reedsville State Prison, a very notorious prison where prisoners were often known not to come out. They were allowed to kill each other, and sometimes guards killed folk there. King felt that was a death sentence for him. The sentence was suspended, probated, suspended, I suppose, whatever you call it. But in any event, When he was arrested on October 19th, it was in violation of his probated sentence. So Fulton County was asked by DeKalb County to hold him for them to pick him up, which they did like 3 o'clock in the morning, and took him to Reedsville in the back of a paddy wagon while he was shackled, and there was a loose German Shepherd dog in the back with him. King said that was the most afraid he'd ever been in his life. 9 days into this process, this was 2 weeks prior to the election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Nixon was leading by double digits nationwide. While that campaign was trying to decide whether they should try to intervene, Bobby Kennedy and a black guy on their campaign staff convinced John Kennedy to allow Robert to call the judge, which he did, and convinced the judge to let King out of jail. That became national and international news. The Kennedy campaign published what was called a blue bomb. It was on blue paper. It was a flyer they distributed in the major cities throughout the country where there were large black populations. The effect of that was, well, this document had quotes in it from Dr. King Jr. and from his father and from Abernathy and from Mrs. King and 1 or 2 other people praising this action on the part of the Kennedys. And black voters switched from voting Republican, mostly at that time, to voting Democrat for the first time in many instances, which resulted in Kennedy winning the election by less than 1 vote per precinct nationwide. So that was a profound effect, and that arrest actually elected John F. Kennedy.
What were some of the strategic approaches used to influence and flip the vote, especially amidst a shifting political landscape transitioning from Republican to Democrat nationally? Well,
it's important to understand that the black vote in Atlanta was essentially what they called a block vote, B-L-O-C-K, not K, B-L-O-C. And that meant that the black vote was pretty much homogeneous. There was a block-by-block organization that was called the Atlanta Negro Voters League. So you had block captains and ward leaders and all that. And there would be mass meetings, and the candidates were always at that time white, male, Protestant, what else you call them? They were all white. No Hispanics. There were no women, no blacks, or anything as candidates. So our strategy was to vote for the lesser of the evils. They would come to the mass meetings to make their pitch, and the Atlanta Negro Voters League would get together and put out an endorsement slate that they called the ticket. And the black vote essentially voted the ticket on election day. So it was important for any white candidate to have the black vote because we were about 25% of the total vote at the time. So it was because of that we had the influence and the power that we had in making some changes. And then, of course, eventually getting blacks elected to the key offices at the city, county, and state level.
That's amazing. The Atlanta student movement was known for its organization, intentionality, and vision. How did these traits contribute to the movement's effectiveness in achieving its goals?
Well, that was an extremely important part of our organizational strategy. We did things with military precision. Lonnie King, who was our first chairman, I succeeded him, had been in the military. He dropped out of school because his mother was working 3 jobs to keep him in school, and he didn't want her to kill herself to keep him in school. So he went to the Navy and was in for 2.5 years or so. There was also a guy who was at ITC at the time that we called the Commandant, who had military experience. He ended up working mostly with SLC later on. But our approach was to plan everything down to the minutest detail and to anticipate every possible eventuality. So before we had our first sit-ins on October 15 in 1960, we had scoped out all of the places that we were going to. We knew how many doors there were, how many seats there were at the lunch counters and all that, where the nearest telephone booth was. You don't know what that is. So that we could have a lookout person stationed there. And so at exactly 11 o'clock on March 15, we went to about 11 locations, about 200 and some of us, and we sat in at that precise time. I was arrested at what was the terminal train station at the time, along with Martin Luther King's brother and a couple of dozen other people. And that's where the Richard Russell building now stands. But we had people already lined up to provide transportation, to make phone calls. People made sandwiches and all that. People made signs, painted signs for us. And that's the most important point that I want to make in this whole conversation, and that is that a movement is by its nature multidimensional, meaning that it involves deep commitment to high ideals on the part of a lot of people doing a lot of different things over a long period of time. Missing any of that, you don't have a movement. You might have a protest action, a press conference, or whatever, but you don't have a movement. And that was the characteristic of our movement, and that we realized that there were many people who would not be prepared to go to jail, to picket, or sit in, or whatever. But they would do these other things. They would drive. They would make phone calls. They would make sandwiches. They would paint signs. We asked the black community to close their accounts with segregation and open account with freedom. And by that, we specifically requested that they close their credit card accounts with the downtown department stores and send us those cards as proof that they had done that. Blacks did that by the hundreds. The other thing, some of them even put their homes up as collateral to bail us out of jail. So you had that kind of commitment from a lot of different people, again, doing a lot of different things. And our boycott lasted for over a year before the time that the king kind of re-energized it with that arrest before we were successful.
Reflecting on the current state of disenfranchisement, some argue that circumstances are getting worse. How do you perceive this evolution, considering your experiences?
Well, I think those who say that are right in many respects. Lonnie King, who I mentioned a minute ago, had the expression that we put our movement on cruise control and the opposition put theirs on overdrive. And to many, to a great extent, that is exactly what happened. We made certain assumptions in 1960 that if we got the laws changed, the signs removed, and people had a chance to interact with each other on a personal basis, they'd get to like or dislike each other on a personal basis rather than based on stereotypes, which, to a great extent is true, but we neglected the fact that bigots have babies, and they teach their kids to be bigots like themselves. So we're in a fourth or fifth generation of that development. So these people are still there. They've had somebody in the White House who gave them permission to come out from under the rocks and show their racism and bigotry with plain colors. So we have lost a lot of ground, without a doubt. Some laws are still there. The opposition has gotten some of them muted. They're trying to change others. So the battle does continue to go on. The worst part of it is that too many of us think that we were free. We were born free. We don't have anything to worry about anymore. We believe that to our peril. Frederick Douglass said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and also that power never gave up anything without a struggle. It never did. It never will. And we have to keep that in mind at all times.
Your lived experiences have inspired me deeply towards our now shared ethos. In light of this, I've created a successor group, nonviolent direct action student group called Amplify Black Voices. And through this initiative, we've made great headway in aligning ourselves with the Charette Project this semester. What role can you play in endorsing and or supporting this initiative to combat disenfranchisement and promote economic opportunity for the Black communities?
I'm all in. You're my new hero, and I'm prepared to follow you with this dream that you have. I was greatly inspired by the vision that you have for this economic development, the eco-friendly aspects of it, and the empowering of people who have less power than they should. And the Charette process gives us an opportunity to bring stakeholders to the table. And people need to understand who those stakeholders are. Those are the people who can design, who can plan, who can make laws or regulations, and also those who are impacted by whatever is going to happen. So essentially anybody around is a potential stakeholder. Mm-hmm. And it's important that these voices are heard in the planning process of anything. The Charette is a process that used by city planners and engineers and all developments of buildings or parks or school projects or whatever. And this is an opportunity to use them in the development of what you have dreamed up, your eco museum. Am I pronouncing that the way you would?
Yes,
or
sir.
eco? Museum, which is a beautiful, beautiful concept where people will live and work and play and in a way that preserves the systems of the environment, as well as increasing their own economic viability. And it's just a beautiful concept. And I think that the more people who hear about it and have their voices heard and contribute their thoughts to it, the surer it will be becoming reality. And I'm excited about it. And I'm prepared to participate in whatever ways you allow me to.
Thank you, Mr. Black. I appreciate you.
My pleasure, sir.
Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you for coming on to the More Conversations podcast with the Andrew Young Center for Global Leadership. Have a great day.